This is an oral history tape made with Carmel Short on the 12th of August 1996. She's in conversation with the archivist Jill Roberts. Carmel, you've been involved with the Cheshire Foundation, I suppose, in two main roles. You were a volunteer at Lee Court from 1953 for 20 years, I think you said, and you also worked as an employee in the offices. Let's talk about Lee Court. What was your first involvement with the foundation? How did you know about Leonard Cheshire and his work? Did you live locally?
No, I saw a reference to Leonard's work in the Universe, and I was working for BEA at the time, and I wasn't doing anything for any. I was just enjoying life, and I thought, well, maybe I could do something to help Leonard Cheshire with his work. And so I wrote to Lee Court and said I didn't have much to offer, but if I could help at weekends. So Alan Finch, I think, was warden at the time, and he invited me to come down one Saturday to see what it was like. And at that time Leonard was in Midhurst.
Oh yes, TB Sanatorium.
That's right.
Yes.
And so I stayed. I said, all I could do was wash up. And they said, good. And so from then on I went one weekend a month. I went on Friday evening and by train from Waterloo, and sometimes I waited for the bus at least, and they always kept my supper for me. And
this is in the old house, I presume.
Oh yes,
yes.
And that was lovely. But then of course it was beginning to fall down, and that's when the Carnegie Foundation decided to build a new home for them.
And you saw them through the move.
Oh yes.
You were one of the people who.
Yeah. Funny things in the old house. We had some lovely people, some lovely old ladies, Miss Permain, and she had a blackbird come and sing on her windows. Yes,
resident.
Oh yes, very fine lady she was. Miss Gager, another one.
And what kind of thing did you do?
Washing up, that's all I
A whole weekend of washing up?
Yes, and helping at servants. I graduated to serving at the tables, but I was so scared of handicapped people. But then I found I got to know them all as individuals, and so if somebody said, oh, move my head, my neck's got stuck, I didn't mind touching them. I was afraid, at first that I would hurt somebody. And then when we moved to the new house, a gorgeous new kitchen, but I had my little washing up area. And I always looked after Trot at weekends when I went down.
Who's Trot?
Trotty, Mrs. Trow. She was one of the residents for years and years. She'd been in the old house. And so she was my special person.
But I believe GC had his eye on you for greater things, didn't he?
Well, he really thought that I worked in the kitchen too, because that's all he ever saw me, and he saw me at Mass. And so then somebody must have told him, no, I was only a weekend staff, because he taught me into going to Market News to do spot of filing for them.
This is still voluntarily?
Oh yes, when I was with BA.
And Market News was the London headquarters.
That's right,
of the foundation.
yes. And I of course got to know Margot at that time, and so sometimes
Margot
I used to
Mason.
go, yes. And met Elaine, who was her assistant. And so I got, in the end, I did most things
Mhm.
associated with the Cheshire home over the years. I mean, sometimes I'd get down and they'd say, the cook, we haven't anyone to cook for the weekend, so I'd be cook. And,
But in 1968, you became secretary.
that's right,
Now,
yes.
is that the first full-time job you had with the foundation?
With the foundation,
I mean?
oh yes.
Yes. And it was GC. I believe you didn't really want to leave British Airways, where you had a
No.
very nice
I
job.
lose my travel and all the rest of it. But it was the right time, and everybody encouraged me to take on the job because Elaine was getting married, leaving to get married, and so that was very nice because it didn't feel like going to work.
It was an extension of your weekend.
Yes. And I knew a lot of people in Cheshire homes, having met them. I'd been to other Cheshire homes, so the homes were very pleased to know that in head office there was somebody who was that knew their needs and so on,
Yes, of course, they
especially
would
the
have been.
residents. Yes, it
Yes,
wasn't
I
that
understand
great
what you're talking
impersonal
Yes.
head office.
Because I suppose during the 60s that was exactly the time that administratively the foundation was expanding and perhaps
yes.
becoming more impersonal.
Yes.
So you being there must have been a bright light.
Yes.
But just before you became a full-time employee, was it still while you were at British Airways that you got this lovely story about Jimmy from the Lake District, his visit to the Holy Land? Now, is that while you were still a volunteer?
Oh yes.
Yes.
Because I feel we had 10% travel, so we were, Mary, Quinn and myself were able to fly out to the Holy Land.
But you were almost
try
forced
them
into
up.
it, weren't you?
Oh well,
With
yes.
Jimmy, yes.
Yes.
Tell
we
us the
went,
story.
well, Jimmy was a resident, and he went to Evensong in the summer one evening with Beryl Lane, the secretary, and there was a visiting deacon from Jerusalem, and he gave a talk on pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and afterwards he met the group, and Jimmy said in grunts that he'd love to go to the Holy Land, and this deacon or dean or whatever he was said, and why not? Beryl, the secretary, put it in this little conversation in the newsletter, and the Westmoreland Times picked it up, repeating it, and people started sending donations for Jimmy's fare to go on a pilgrimage. So much so that Beryl was so worried because there was no way that they could organise a pilgrimage for Jimmy from up there.
Was he very badly disabled?
Oh yes, very. His arms laid all over the place, and legs, and he had a long chair, and he couldn't speak very well. We could understand him, but anyway, when Leonard got the letter from Beryl Lane, he put a letter to me on a tape, which Mary Quinn, Henry Martin's secretary, had to type to me, saying, could we organise something in London, because Leonard knew we'd been to the Holy Land several times, because Beryl Lane and Mrs. Cotton, who was a volunteer up there, both ladies in their 60s, 70s, said they would come with Jimmy if we could, and they would look after him at night, and we said we would look after him in the daytime. Anyway, after investigations, I found the only people who would take him was into church travel. So it was all fixed. They came down and flew with him to church travel. We met in Jerusalem. Father Brady, who was a Scottish Episcopalian, was very pleased to see us. And when we arrived, because he didn't know that there were going to be 2 younger people to look after him in the daytime. So he welcomed us with open arms. And there we had an Arab driver and car allocated to us. But he was great help. We got Jimmy everywhere. That was in Jordan. But then later when we moved into Israel, this was before the 6-Day War. So after that we were into Israel. We were in a coach, and we lost our good Arab driver, our good help. But we had Moses, who was the driver. And once we got into Israel, the rest of the group, who hadn't been very nice to us in Jordan.
Do you think that's because they were frightened of the responsibility that Jimmy
certainly
represented?
Yes. But having seen that we were capable of looking after them, we really were self-sufficient. That they then came forward and were friendly towards us. And you can understand, it was their holiday of a lifetime. And 1 or 2 of them had their own, we heard afterwards, they had handicapped people. And it was really, they were on this trip for a rest from their caring. And there were 2 nurses, and they helped us with Jimmy when we got to Tiberias, and we persuaded him to go into the water, which he didn't want. But he was an amazing character. He knew the Bible inside out, because his mother had taught him to read, and I think that was the only book she had. And he knew that when we got to Tiberias, and we were at some point, and he would say, "Where are we?" And he'd tell us that was where the pigs all ran down the hill. I mean, his knowledge of the Bible was far greater than mine.
And then you left British Airways. GC talked you into it, did he? He seemed to have been quite good at
yes,
talking people into doing things
yes.
he wanted them to. What did
Well,
he
it was
say?
his idea, shall we say.
Yeah. What did he say to?
Oh, I can't remember. But
you have said it felt right anyway.
Yes. Once I'd made the decision, yes. But I knew I was going to miss the Shareways.
And did you get involved then with organising another trip to America?
Oh yes, that was
a bit later.
Later,
in the 70s,
yes. An American group had been in England the year before, and I met Leonard. I think it was at Lee Court when we had some international conference or something, and they came, and I got involved with them, and went on 1 or 2 trips with them, and then met them again in Ireland. I flew to Shannon, and they were a nice group. And Leonard said, wouldn't it be an idea if next year we joined a group of Cheshire residents, joined them in this was New Horizons, I think they were called, who organised things for handicapped people. If we joined one of their trips in the States. And I said, oh, ridiculous, nobody could afford that. It was £250. And he said, well, you never know. He said, well, they'd have to have each have to have an escort. He said, well, do a circular and see. And we got about 12 or more. It was amazing. The person I looked after was Rosa Searle from, she couldn't afford an escort, but she'd always wanted to go to the States, and during the war, as a job, she had worked in nurseries, picking out cucumber seeds and tomato seeds as a war effort, and she got sixpence. I don't know whether it was a day or a week, but she'd saved all those sixpences, so she had enough in the post office to
all
pay.
that time before?
Yes. Well, it wasn't all that time after the war. You see, it was, I suppose it was 30
we're
years.
talking,
30
yes,
years
30
after.
years.
Yes. She had her savings and her life savings, and this is what she'd always wanted to do. Well, that was a great trip. We had enough people to look after those we brought. We flew TWA. They were very good to us. And there was Ron, Travers, and Jill, and his wife, and various other people. And we stayed at the hotel opposite Penn Station. But when we got there were a whole lot of American handicapped people who didn't have escorts. So in the end, we were looking after them as well, because once they were left, they were very self-sufficient in their own homes, but once outside, because we couldn't afford to eat in at the, I think it was called the Waldorf Astoria or something at that time. It isn't called that anymore. So Ron and friends would rush out to, during the day we were all right because we had US Army people. They had organised to look after us, and we went out on coaches on trips. But they knocked off at 6, and then everybody wanted to go out to eat. So they would go along around about to see who could take 24 wheelchairs. So we finished up eating hamburgers and pizzas and so forth, and pushing about 3 or 4 wheelchairs each, one wheelchair pushing another.
A picture that conjures up, it's lovely.
Which was fine until you got to the traffic lights. You had to abandon 2 or 3 and rush across. But usually people came along and pushed some of them along. And then we went to Philadelphia.
Wasn't there an Italian bar that opened up especially for you?
Yes, round the corner from, I think it's about 34th Street, there's a little Italian restaurant. And, it was a sandwich bar, really, yeah. That was so spaghetti but Ron went round, talked to the owner, and told them the situation, and said, they really want a nice meal, a good steak. He says, well, we only open in the daytime, we don't stay open at night. And they said, but Ron persuaded him, and all the staff volunteered to stay on. Anyway, they were marvellous. My sister lives in New York, so she went to Gimbel's, which was just up the road, and got wine for us, and the owner said yes, that'll be fine. So we had a lovely evening there, but that was the only decent meal we had in New York. Then when we went to Philadelphia, we stayed at a gorgeous hotel there. Benjamin Franklin, I think it was. Went out on trips there. We went to Annapolis and various places. We had US Navy looking after us during the day there.
US Navy as well as Army?
Army in New York, yes. Navy in Philadelphia, and Marines in Washington.
And who had organised these contacts then? Was it Ron?
Oh no, these people, the New Horizons.
Right.
By the time we got to Washington, and when we were in Philadelphia, see, people keep joining. We had 114 wheelchair. It was a big operation. They did fall down when we got to Washington, and it was terribly hot there, way up in the 90s every day. But it wasn't a hotel that we were in. It was an apartment block outside of the city, and it only had a coffee shop But they had organised good things there, I must say. We went to the White House early in the morning. We had it to ourselves, and it was President Nixon then, and his daughter was getting married the next day or so. But it was only us at the White House that early in the morning. They'd opened it up especially. Yes, and it was in June. Terribly hot. But we had one resident when we were there on our trip, absolute life and soul of the party always. Great, she did wheelchair dancing and all that, yeah. And before I got to know her on the telephone, because before we went, she did not want her mother to come with us. She went everywhere with her mother, and her mother wanted to get her, and she was in her 80s, this mother. So in the end, mother consented not to come. And anyway, when we got to Washington, it was so hot. She had respiratory trouble. And the 2 or 3 days before we were leaving, she collapsed, and they rushed her to hospital and got oxygen, and she was fine. But the next day, they couldn't revive her. So it was terribly sad. And then one of the party stayed behind to deal with all we dealt with as much of the red tape as we could before leaving, and then Dee Dee came back with the body. And we had to go to, because Ronald, myself, various others, we arranged to go to the funeral. And when we got there, we couldn't believe it. The whole village had turned out for the funeral. And her mother was wonderful to us. Said that it had been Patsy's great wish to go to America, and we had fulfilled that.
Tell me something about the setup in the offices at Market Mews.
We were in number 7. That was UK. And then next door was number 5, and that was when, you see, when Margot left to get married, they split the job up.
Because Margot used to do it all, did she?
Oh yes,
right,
yes, it was small at that
Margot
time.
Mason was
who used to rush off and open homes all over the place. And Elaine was a very good anchor lady in the office. But at this stage, when Elaine was secretary, they had an overseas secretary in number 5, Market Mews.
Right.
They looked after overseas stuff. But the foundation and the trustees were in number 7.
Right.
And it was that part of it that I was secretary of the company.
Right. And how many of you were there in there?
There must have been, we had part-timers.
The volunteers? Was it still working with volunteers at this stage?
No, we had about
late 60s.
4, 5, 6 employees. Oh, and the next door secretary, they were employees. So, and then we had people who would, volunteers who would come in different days. They were ex-Westminster Bank staff. We had 1 or 2 of those who would come in for a day. And you would have tapes ready for them. And then we had people who would come in and do the filing. It was great not having to do it. Nasty old filing.
And was GC himself around a lot at this time in the offices?
In number 3. Oh, it was far away. We bought number 3 in those years, yes.
Right.
So when he came, he was in number 3.
Why as far away as possible?
Well, he was disruptive.
Tell me something about him as a person. Was he disruptive because of his...
Oh, well, he lived... He'd have a lot of work to do, and he'd come in for a chat and with his good ideas and so on. And it was his secretary was in number 5.
Who was that?
Well, we had various secretaries, but the main one was always Joan Masters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Joan Keenan, as she is now.
That's right,
Done a tape
yes.
with her, yes.
Yes.
So DC was disruptive, was he?
Yes, but, well, he always had coming in with good ideas, or he'd come in, because he hadn't any money. They didn't give him much money each day when he was in London. They only gave him from number 5 enough for the day, because he would give it away to the first tramp he saw, and so even if he'd been given his fare to wherever he was going, and he'd have given it away, he'd get to a station without money and say he really had to get to so-and-so. Could he leave his name and address and fix up with them? And they'd say, right, name and address. He'd say Leonard, Cheshire, and they'd say, oh, where do you want to go? And it was the same with taxi drivers. The number of times he'd come, they'd have all gone home at number 5, and he'd have a taxi outside. He didn't have enough to pay the fare. But one occasion I can remember, he arrived early in the morning, and it must have been about 8, and he came in to me and said, I had to open up the safe to get some money. He said he'd have to go. Would I pay the taxi driver? He had to make the taxi driver a cup of tea. So he went off to number 3, I think it was. We owned number 3 by this time. And the taxi driver came in and he said, that's Leonard Cheshire, I can't take money from him. So anyway, I insisted on paying for that trip, and he said, no, he's making me a cup of tea. So he stayed on. That morning, Leonard had various appointments, and he drove him round all morning for free. He was so overcome.
What a lovely story. I think we'll finish it there. Thank you very much indeed, Carmel Short.